Hello, welcome to Board Deck and Dice. Today we are looking at Euphoria. So this is Euphoria. I'm going to be zooming about the board because it's quite big and there's quite a lot of detail on there. But three of the areas in Euphoria are essentially the same but just with different resources. So I'll just zoom into one of those. I'll look at the Icarite territory, which is the significantly different territory. Basically, Euphoria has the board has four different areas on it, and it looks like a massive amount to take in. And, you know, in some ways that is true. But we'll try and go through it as best we can. I don't think we're going to get everything in it. As you can see, I haven't even prepared properly. So let's just talk about the cards first. The basic setup for Euphoria is it's a dystopian future where four factions are vying for control, and you're kind of trying to influence those factions to get most of your influence out. So everyone has 10 stars, 10 wooden stars, and they're trying to get those out onto the board in various places or onto cards that are in front of them. The four factions are the subterranean underground faction, the Euphorian faction, the Wastelanders, and the Icarites, who are up in the hot air balloons. Every player gets a helpful card here which has all the resources on the front and all the key stuff, which is really good, and on the back it's a dilemma card. And at some point in the game, when you have this resource or this particular artifact or two artifacts of any type, you can turn this over and choose to help the dystopia by turning in a friend on this one, and you would get a star instantly on this card. Or you can help the people, and that would let you draw 2 recruits and keep 1. And recruits are another way of scoring stars and give you special powers. So it's not as obvious as a decision as it might first seem. This is kind of an instant star, whereas this is kind of more long term. But in some cases, you may get a recruit you can put a star on straight away. And there's 6 of those that are dealt out randomly in the game. That card mentioned the 2 other cards in the games. You have artifacts, which are wherever there's a hexagon, it talks about an artifact, and they're simply artifacts from the past, like books, teddy bears, glasses, balloons, baseball bats. If on the board, you usually can use 3 different ones of these to take some actions, to pay for some actions, but wherever it says 3 different ones, you can also use 2 the same as equivalent of 3 different. The last card are recruits, and you will start with 2 of these, one face down who isn't yet loyal to you, and one face up. They have a loyalty to a faction, a special power, and during the course of the game, if you max out the allegiance to their faction, they will get a star put on them. So if you had 3 of the same faction and you get that to the end of the allegiance tracker, you will get 3 stars. You get a star on each recruit, and there's recruits for all of the 4 factions, and they all have different powers, one of which, like I say, will go face down, and one of which will, depending on your dilemma card, you'll get to keep as well and activate another power. Let's first look at the tracker in the top corner. So here we have 2 important tracks, and each player has a coloured marker there, and we have the knowledge track. Basically, in this game, you're going to be rolling dice and placing them as your workers. They're just standard, well, they're not standard because they're lovely dice, but they're 1 to 6 essentially. Every time you take a dice off the board or gain a dice, you roll it. You will check the numbers on those dice for 2 things. The first you're checking is if you've rolled 2 numbers the same, because if you have, or more, 2 or more numbers the same. If you have, you can place all those workers in 1 turn rather than taking 2 turns. The other thing you're checking is if your knowledge is equal to or greater than 16. You start with 2 worker dice and you can get up to 4. If your knowledge on the dice you've rolled, not the dice you've put on the board, but the dice that are in front of you, plus the number you are on your knowledge track is equal to or greater than 16, you lose a worker. So the more workers you take in, the more chance you have of them becoming knowledgeable of your schemes and your manipulations, and they basically run off. The morale track, or I think it's morale, I might be wrong about that. That might be from Scythe. But the track up here is your maximum hand size. So while you're on 1, you can have 1 card, etc., etc. So to do some of these set things with the artifacts, you're going to need to get your hand size up to at least 3. These are also sort of resources in the sense that you can, in certain situations, spend either of them or gain more of them as rewards or as payments for things. In the game, there are a load of wooden pieces. I'll just grab some of them. And they come in 2 categories. The first is commodities. Now, commodities take the form of energy, bliss. Bliss is the green one, food is the orange one, and water is the blue one. Commodities can be used to gain various things on the board, and also can be turned into resources, of which you have gold, brick and metal. So it's really important to differentiate between those. When on the board it shows a circle with 3 colours, it's talking about resources. When it shows a cube, it's talking about commodities. Oh, just knocked the mic, sorry about that. Let's zoom into the different faction of the Icarites and talk about them. So up here we have the Icarite faction. For the amount of players, you will put these tokens on a star so that so if we're playing a 4-player game, you only leave 4 spaces available. And this is where you'll put your stars should you activate one of your dice. So in the first space, if you put a dice here, you pay what's in the grey box and you get what's in the white circles. So if I pay 3 artifacts or 2 artifacts the same, I will get a star and I will pop it in there, and I can have multiple stars in here. It doesn't just have to be, it's not just a one-shot thing. And I will move my allegiance, the allegiance track on for the Icarites, which I'll show you in a moment. Here you will pay 3 of any commodities to do the same thing. Here you will pay 1 of any resource and some bliss to gain 2 artifacts and allegiance up. And here you will pay 1 of any resource and 1 bliss to put your allegiance up and gain 2 commodities. The cloud mine is the only thing that the Icarites have that is the same as everyone else. Everyone has a kind of farm or mine or generator where they will produce their commodities, and that is dependent on number. So this is one of the areas where number becomes important. If you're the first person to put a dice into here, you look at your number and you take from that section. So I've put a 3 in, I take from one before. If next turn round I put another 3 in, I'm now taking from this section, which gives me bliss and loses me a place on the knowledge track, which is quite helpful. If blue comes in then and puts 5 in, then they're taking from the 9+, where they get 2, but they gain a knowledge. These big squares, you can put any amount of dice in. However, these squares with triangles on, you can be bumped with the arrow there, you can be bumped from. So if I play there and later on blue wants to go there and I haven't retrieved my dice yet, blue can come on and bump me and I get that back and roll it and perform a knowledge check. On your turn, you'll simply be placing a dice out or retrieving workers, and retrieving workers has a cost of losing morale, or you pay food or bliss and you gain 2 morale. That's illustrated on the board as well. Let's go and have a look at one of the other factions. So we're in the subterranean section now, and the first thing we have, which is unique to this part of the board, is the worker activation tank, where you can get another worker. You pay either 3 electricity or 3 water, and you get another worker which is rolled instantly, and you either lose 2 knowledge or gain 2 morale. Moving on, we have this, which is the same as in Icarus. You place a dice there, you can be bumped, you pay 3 artifacts or 2 the same, and you get to place a star in the subterranean loyalty star, and you get to move up the allegiance track. Also what we have here is buildings. Now when you play here and a building's activated, or a custom market, you can also put a star into that if you haven't already got one. The way the construction sites work is if you have a resource of that type, you can play your dice there and pay that resource. Once the required amount of resources have been paid, then that tile will turn over and anyone who contributed will get a star. Now, in a 2 to 3 player game, you only need 2 spaces. In a 4 player game, you only need 3. And in a 5 to 6 player game, you need all 4. It can be worthwhile trying to do this with as few people as possible, because when this flips over, it moves down and it has a new way of getting a star for this, but not to put on the building. But it also has a punishment for any player who hasn't put a star on that building, that construction site. You may not use pairs of artifacts at artifact markers. So if that is active and white is the only one who's contributed, blue cannot use pairs here anymore. They have to use 3 until they go there and put a star on that. So that is a kind of, there's loads of these in the box and these are unique each time, and they're a good way of getting stars out, but they punish people who haven't contributed to them. Then we have the kind of Aquify unit where you're getting your commodity for this area. It's the same as the Icarites one, but gives a different commodity. And then we have a tunnel, and all 3 of the non-Icarite factions have tunnels that lead to one of the others' areas and can steal resources off them. Every time you go here, you pay a water and you gain a metal or an artifact, and you move your miner along. When your miner gets to this point of the track with the card on, anybody who has a recruit, remember the recruit cards, loyal to that faction face down, can flip it over and start using its power. When it gets to the end, this blocking token comes off, and that's now a space that can be used by anyone who has workers loyal to this faction. So it has recruits, sorry, any of those cards. So if I don't have a subterranean recruit, I cannot use the end of that tunnel. The last thing to look at is the allegiance track. Every time you take an action that shows one of the league logos, you move up their allegiance, and the first 3 spaces allow you to take double resource commodities from the aquifer, the farm, the generator and the cloud mine. So when you go to that place that has 1 to 4, 5 to 8, 9 plus, you're taking 1 extra commodity, so that's really good. When it gets to the next stage, to stage 2, when you go on a tunnel space, you don't have to choose between the 2 rewards, you take them both. When you get to that section, you flip over any workers that are face down that are loyal to that faction, and when it gets to the star, if it gets to the star, you then place a star on any recruits you have that are of that faction. The Icarite faction is slightly different in that it doesn't have a tunnel, and in the middle instead, whenever you place a star in the Icarite territory, you also get an artifact. There are other things on the board that help with the flow of the game, but that is essentially how the game works. Once a player gets 10 of their stars on the board or on the card, they are declared a winner. It's possible for a tie, and there are tiebreakers for that situation. That is how you play Euphoria. I find Euphoria a really interesting game. I think one of the reasons I find it interesting is that it is the last of Jamie Stegmaier's games that I've played, and therefore it's really interesting for me to see how some of his approaches have evolved over the time. Things that may have been a complaint if I'd played this first, you can see that he's kind of learnt from it in Viticulture and in Scythe, so it's really interesting. And although there are those things, I still really like it as a game. The whole idea of dice placement I really like, and the luck of the numbers doesn't come into the game too much. Yes, you can say that when you roll a double, you get to, or a triple or a quadruple of the same number, you get to put those out, and sometimes it does happen more often than not for certain players, but for me it hasn't happened enough to really make me think that it's cost the game, and the game, because it's this race similar to Scythe where you're trying to get your stars out, the game does remain quick because you're very aware of what other people are doing. Should you bump them and give them a worker back, or try and hold off because they might retrieve it next go? Very interesting decisions. The board is incredibly busy, but having said that, you can teach it from just teaching the Icarus area, which is different to the rest, and one of the other three, and just pointing out how they're similar. So teach the unique parts and then one of the similar parts, and it starts to make sense. I think that's where, for me, it loses points against viticulture, because you look at the viticulture board and it's a field and you're doing winemaking, and all of us have some idea of how that works. You get grapes, you perform magic voodoo on them and they become wine. In Euphoria, it's a fantastical land because it's a future setting. It's not one that we have anything but guesses about, so that kind of works against it in that sense. The components are lovely. I really enjoy the card play. Yeah, there's some luck there again with the artifacts, but it's not a big deal because you can always use 3 different ones. Yes, if you keep drawing the same ones, that's going to benefit you more, but you know, that's not a big deal. I found that even when I'm teaching it to new players, despite the initial intimidation of the board, particularly the board, they get into it really quickly. There is some confusion for me with the resources and the commodities and them having different things. You know, I'm used to calling everything resources that gets wooden and put in front of me. So having that 2-level thing does cause a bit of confusion at first, but then, you know, you point out that the resources are only really used for the building markets and us to turn into other things up in the Icarite area, and again, it kind of makes sense. I love the fact that there's loads of things to do. You can push up the allegiance track, but if someone else has got a recruit that's in that allegiance, you don't really want to. I've done it myself, and I've seen other players collect 3 recruits of the same allegiance, so when that star hits, they're bang going to get 3 stars out, and although the game usually remains close, that can be a real killer, and you've got to watch that. You've got to think, are they pushing that up because they want to get 3 stars at once? And I really enjoy that. The knowledge system is really clever. The fact that you're not necessarily punished for having more workers, but it's a more risky play because you're more likely to hit that 16, and the way the morale and the knowledge all work together and kind of interweave, and you can use them almost as resources, spend them to do stuff, spend them so you don't have to spend food or bliss to retrieve your workers. That all works really well. The dilemma card, do you go for a star straight away or play the long-term game, get another recruit? That works, and I've seen people do both of those as well. So all in all, it's a great game that really holds my attention. I love the theme of it. I love the dystopian theme. I don't think it is as good as Viticulture, but I'm glad I played them in this order, because it's just a real privilege and kind of pleasure to see how the games have evolved. It comes with that same approach to instructions, where you have the full instructions and then you have the double-sided sheet, which is, after one read through the instructions, is pretty much all you'll need to refer to, apart from the odd special occasion. I really like that approach. The setup for this one is a bit messier than Viticulture and Scythe. It tells you to put resources on the board, and there's no actual space defined with a boundary. And I know that, again, with how much is on the board, that is going to detract again from actually what is a fairly straightforward game once you start playing. But yeah, so you've got to put all the resources and the commodities on the board rather than outside, and again, it just adds to that overwhelming feeling. However, I've got to say that just with Viticulture and with Scythe, once you start playing, because the choices you have are so straightforward. Play a worker, retrieve your workers. Play a worker, retrieve your workers. Resolve your ethical dilemma card. And then you're doing where you're placing to. And initially that's always going to be commodity gathering, so you can do more. It just really works. The construction sites that you build with other players are so good in all player counts, really, because you want to get in on that. If someone starts building up resources, you're looking and going, right, which site are they trying to construct, and do I have the resources spare that I can go in if they start pushing for that? And then they roll 3 3s and they put all the resources in themselves, and everyone else has that punishment. I really like that idea. It changes you've been working towards getting stars somehow over here, and then all of a sudden you've got a punishment in play. Whenever you roll a 2, you lose something. So now you've got to try and get these artifact cards, but your hand limit, you've been spending that to do other stuff. It works really well. Intimidation factor is high on this one, and higher than Viticulture. Is it higher than Scythe? That's a good question. It's certainly up there. The rules are good, and the rule summary sheet, I love it. I love it in every James Stegmaier game I've seen. And it is a lot of fun. And once again, even with new players to the game, once you start playing, it's fairly much because by the time it gets round, you know what you want to do. Rarely are spaces blocked because you can bump players off, but that's a consideration as well. So yeah, Euphoria has really kind of won me over. It'd be really interesting if this had been my first experience, and before Viticulture particularly. But as it is, it's a lot of fun. I would definitely add this to kind of my collection with Viticulture and Scythe. Yeah, for the right price, which I've seen it at really good prices, I would add this, and I believe there's an expansion coming as well, so it's definitely one that I would consider. So there you have it, Euphoria from Stegmaier Games. A recommendation from me: if you can put up with the business of the board, the initial intimidation factor, you're going to find that typical of Stegmaier Games, a game that is easy to approach yet has deep options and makes you think about what you would do next time when you play it. Thanks very much for watching Board Deck and Dice. I'll see you next time.